Our next speaker on the topic of responsible gambling is Simon Hansen, who is here on behalf of responsible gaming solution provider Mindway AI. Simon will tell us more about data and the early detection of problematic gambling behavior. Welcome, Simon. Please come to the stage. Thank you. The clicker is here on the...
Thank you for the introduction. So I'm here to talk about how we at Mindway have built a technology that empowers operators to take the massive amounts of raw data that we have in the online gambling space and actually turn it into actionable intelligence within the safer gambling space. We call it the game scanner solution. And you can think about the game scanner solution as an anti-collision system that's basically monitoring your entire customer database all the time and detecting players who are moving towards an unsustainable space and empowering the operators to actually take meaningful actions that helps drive the customer back into a sustainable space. How do we actually do this? So what's kind of unique about our approach is that we're combining artificial intelligence with human expertise. Now, human expertise is really, really powerful because we're using experts who've been working with problem gambling behaviors for a very, very long time, who know all of the details, and when they're presented with the right graphs and visualizations of a player's behavior, can accurately identify very, very early indicators of problem gambling behavior so that we can intervene at a very, very early stage. However, using human expertise on entire customer database is of course not scalable in itself, right? And that's why we're combining it with AI. So by teaching AI to look at the same data that the experts are actually reviewing and replicate an assessment that an expert would make, we actually now have a system that is scalable to track millions of players and on an ongoing basis and flag those customers that require our attention. Now, I want to make a comparison because to show what the added value of the game scanner solution is. So when we started developing the game scanner solution, we looked at an industry that relied a lot on threshold-based system. So where you would define a number of risk markers, and then for each of these risk markers, you would set a threshold and say, well, if you spend more than X hours per day, if you lose more than X amount of euros in a single day, then that's a point, and we'll add that to your risk score. But this approach is not sophisticated enough because the individual circumstances related to the individual's gambling behavior can be very different, right? We'll have the student who have less disposable income, and we might have a person who's not necessarily losing a lot of money, but gambling is still kind of impairing their ability to take care of their work or study. And we also need to find those players. And that's what the game scanner approach enables us to do. Because we're using human expertise, we can look at the individual risk markers in the context of the player's overall gambling behavior to make a much more precise sort of assessment of the player's risk. So that we're not working with risk on or off, but we're actually working on, with risk on a spectrum. And this spectrum from the Mindway side, from the game scanner side, is not just uniform. When we develop AI solutions, we actually need systems that are also explainable and allow us to trigger personalized intervention strategies. So what we've developed the game scanners to do is not just replicate the kind of final assessment of the experts.
Simon, I'm sorry to disturb you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, sorry. Apologies.
No worries. So what's also really important and really powerful about the game scanner solution is that we've not just kind of asked it to replicate the final assessment of the expert, but also the justification of the specific behavioral characteristics that the experts have identified, so that we can actually both have an algorithm that our staff can understand, right, when they're reviewing individual cases or when we are kind of assessing our policies, but also empower us to activate personalized intervention strategies that are suggested to be much more effective, right? So if a person is predominantly flagged for time consumption, well, then we target that actively in our communication. And if it's loss chasing, then it's another type of communication that we use. Now, aside from the this player profile the AI generates, We also, with the game scanner solution, provide advanced analytics module that allows you to, as a safer gambling officer, in those cases where you need to supplement the AI automated decision with manual follow-ups, can go in and look at these huge amount of data in a way that's easily understandable, where you can effectively sort of see the events that are driving the risk for this particular player and use that in a communication with the player to maximize the efficiency of your intervention. Because where these insights start to become really powerful is when we start to translate the insights into actions. And because we're using this spectrum of risk, we can actually adapt the intervention strategies so that they fit the sort of severity of expected severity of gambling-related harms, and use automated intervention strategy and information for those lower and at-risk players, and use other more hard interventions for the high-risk players. Now, if we look at the manual intervention side of things, we need also the system to be super efficient so that we can actually have our safer gambling officers using their time actually working on these very, very important cases and not having to juggle between 7 different systems and themselves find the players that they need to be reviewing. So what GameScanner actually also allows is that it allows to take a customized safer gambling policy and actually operationalize that so that the system itself will flag all of the players that needs to be manually reviewed due to your safer gambling policies. And as a safer gambling officer, I can then go in, I can click exactly the cases that I need to review. I'll have all the plots and graph and analytics available to me so I can do a very efficient and very precise review and then trigger appropriate interventions or schedule follow-ups. And for the automatic interventions, we make use of this player profile. So basically looking at the risk characteristics of the specific player and putting forward advice or communication that's adapted to the particular risk factors that the player exhibit to maximize effectiveness, or even suggest safer gambling tools that are relevant to the specific risk markers that are observed for the individual player that can look radically different from one player to another player. Now, once we start trigger actions and start deploying our safer gambling strategy, we also need to have analytic capabilities to go in and both on an individual basis and on the group level actively evaluate the effectiveness of our intervention strategies or safer gambling policies. And these are tasks that can be very kind of time consuming and require a lot of resources to do, because we need a lot of analytics guys to structure all of the data and get it into shape and get the insights that we need. But the game scanner solution actually comes with an analytics solution that allows you to quite easily, with limited training, go in and look at the riskiness of your entire customer database and see how many of my customers are high risk, how many are medium, how many are low risk, and so on and so forth. But actually also replicate this analysis for specific segments of interest, right? So if you, by your regulation, are kind of incentivized or you need to pay extra attention to vulnerable customers, such as young customers, then you can also quickly generate this profile or this view specifically for those customers without having to juggle around a lot of data tables. It's also very important that this analytics tool can also monitor developments over time so that we can actually see, are we succeeding in getting a more and more sustainable customer database? Are we moving the customers into the right place, or do we see the opposite? What about when we just introduced this new safer gambling tool, or when we did this campaign, did we actually see that the green group, the group of green customers, sustainable customers, is getting bigger and bigger? Or is it suggested not to have the effect that we actually intended to do? Now, one thing that's also very important if we really want to excel at safer gambling is not just to look at the players, but actually also look at our products, right? And we know from researched that it can be quite difficult to look at two slot machines and decide, okay, is slot machine A going to be more risky than slot machine B? Because there's going to be a lot of structural characteristics like audio, visual, speed of play, payout ratio, bonus games and stuff like that that interplay with one another. So what we basically do at Mindway is that we look at players' product preference, and then we ask what products or groups of products are your high-risk players centered around. So we can basically either for groups of products or for specific products go in and look, do we have a high concentration of high-risk players here? And if yes, do we need to put extra safeguards in front of those products to help protect the players? Or for instance, avoid marketing these products to vulnerable customers. Now, once we have all these things in place and have it set up in an effective way, we can start to enter this wheel where we can constantly and very effectively go in, deploy a safer gambling policy and apply it, test it to see whether it's actually having the desired effect, find out what are the learnings, optimize it, and then constantly kind of evolve this wheel. And with Game Scanner, you don't get a one-size-fits-all solution. You get a solution that's actually tailored to the specific regulations, where we can put in these specific rules that are specific to the regulations, or even have experts from your local regulation jurisdiction go in and review individual cases from your customer database to kind of all the time sharpen this wheel here and improve and drive the customer database towards a more sustainable space. Thank you for listening in.
Thank you, Simon. Please stay on the stage for one moment. I think there's one audience question we same flashing by in Slido. Simon, which behaviors do you think have high-risk players in common? So which behaviors?
Yeah, so this is a tricky question, right? Because it can look quite different, right? So I think what's really interesting is that across a lot of players, something like time consumption can be a common high-risk indicator, but it looks very different from sports betting, for instance, to something like casino players. So for casino players, we might have long extended sessions, whereas for the sports players, it can be more sort of small drips of activity through the entire day and all sorts of periods or time of day. So in a sense, there's a lot of kind of shared patterns in problem gambling behavior, but they kind of manifest themselves in different ways depending on what products we are looking at, what player groups, etc., etc.
Thank you very much, Simon, and see you later in the coffee break. Thank you.